Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
On today's podcast, we have an important and inspiring conversation with Ohio State Representative Dontavius Jarrells. As a child, Jarrells suffered lead poisoning, and he worked his way into the Ohio State legislature so that he could address that issue and so many more for underserved communities. We talked about how you get things done in the minority, how you advocate for underserved communities, and the high personal cost of public service. It's an amazing conversation with an amazing representative. Enjoy.
Okay.
Ohio State Representative Dontavius Jarrells, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Ryan, it's good to be here.
I want to start with your story. It's an extraordinary one.
Thank you.
And just let the audience know how you found yourself in a position addressing lead pipe contamination after your childhood and now in the state legislature.
Well, Ryan, it's really great to be here, and to the audience, thank you for listening. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised in the Hough neighborhood. And growing up, every time I walked out my house, I knew what disinvestment looked like in real time. And I was always that kid that was asking the questions like, why is it like this? And at first, me and my grandmother used to watch Oprah, and so that's why I wanted to be Oprah. Because for me, it was like she was always good at asking the right questions. I mean, so I'll be in class trying to interview my teachers, like, tell me understand why this math is so important to us right now. Just being that kid, right? And over time, I got into like a lot of different leadership programs. I traveled to Tennessee State University in middle school during the summer, learned a number of things around leadership development. I fell in love with policy. And when I got into high school at East Tech in Cleveland, home of Jesse Owens for folks who are listening, I got really involved in addressing like small school issues, looking at my community, saying, what can we do to get back to students who are marginalized, who do not have food for Thanksgiving? And that led to me joining the robotics team, Team 120, which was the first African-American robotics team that was sponsored by NASA in the country. And I just had these very fulfilling experiences that really showed me that there is something outside of my block, outside of my neighborhood, that I can actually be a vehicle of change if given the opportunity. And so when I went to college, I majored in political science economics. And there I learned, for the first time how to really assess policy, evaluate it, and then ultimately figure out ways to change it and what vehicles and mechanisms we need in order to do that. And I fell in love with wanting to go into some space of addressing these policies head on. And I was going to go to law school, then it was just too high of a cost when I was graduating. And then I found myself literally moving to Columbus and working at the Ohio Legislative Service Commission as a fellow. And our Legislative Service Commission, for those who are listening, that's the body, the nonpartisan body that helps draft our legislation that we then present across the State House, in both the House and the Senate. And so I worked for 5 different members as a fellow. And for the first time, now mind you, I've never been to the State House ever in my life, right, before that moment, before working there. And I was like, what in the world? What is this? This is a body that actually is addressing the issues that I saw day in and day out in my community. I have to be here one day. I want to get involved. I want to really learn everything I can to figure out how I can hopefully become a state representative. And that's what started my journey. To talk a little bit about lead, I was a a survivor of lead poisoning when I was a very small child, around 4 or 5. And I didn't get lead poisoning from the water. I got lead poisoning from paint chips. And so my grandmother had very antique furniture. She was born in the 1920s. And her and I would watch sci-fi, the sci-fi channel like Twilight Zone together. And this table, and for folks who are listening, paint chips taste like lead. Taste like chocolate. They taste sweet. And so a lot of kids who get lead poisoning when they're eating paint chips, it's because there's a sweet taste that comes with that paint. And so unbeknownst to me, it was almost like Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, like eating things, furniture, and I didn't know I was poisoning myself. I was just picking the paint off the table and eating it. And I started getting really sick. And my grandmother and my mom said, something's wrong with that boy. You gotta take him to the hospital. And thank God they did, because I almost died from lead poisoning. And I survived, but the neurological impacts, I ended up having to do speech pathology classes during elementary school, and just really, I recovered, thankfully, and I'm now able to advocate on behalf of so many who may not have the same voice that I do. But that was a very scary time. And when I got to the legislature looking at lead policy, unfortunately, there was very little related to lead policy laws and just lead laws in Ohio. And I was like, we got to change that. And so I used my experience, and then ultimately when I became elected, used my advocacy to begin to change policy in real time.
And you talk about being a voice for people who don't have a voice in the system.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that's like and what have been your priorities? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to pass any law. It's especially difficult when you're in the minority.
Yeah, super minority. Come on.
and it's really difficult to speak for people who don't have power in a system.
Yeah.
So how do you think about how do you make impact in your job?
It's a great question, Ryan. I think about my job in like 3 buckets. One is the passing laws. Like I'm just a bill sent on Capitol Hill, in this case, the State House Hill. The second is moving money, so allocating funds to communities, projects, to people, organizations that are doing good work in the community. And then the third bucket is really being a champion. Most of the time, a lot of people, when they call my office, it's almost like my office is supposed to do a lot of miracles. You're a miracle worker, right? Because they've gone through the bureaucracy, they try to go work with the city, or they try to deal with the federal government, and they just don't know where to go. And so they call my office saying, hey, I've tried this, and this. Can you please tell me who I need to talk to or help me navigate the situation? Oh, and by the way, I might get evicted next week, right? And so there's a layering of complexity, and my office has to be really in the zone, if you will, of like figuring out how to get to the root cause of that person's issue, and then ultimately help them, guide them to, various ways to get support and help. So those 3 buckets is how I kind of look at my job. And within those 3 buckets, they require different strategies. And when I think about speaking up for people who don't have the voice, that's really everybody, to be quite frank with you, because a lot of folks don't know what I do, quite frankly. They confuse me with a congressperson when I'm out in the community. They've never been to the State House. That's one of the first questions I ask when I'm doing community events is who's all been to the State House. And mind you, to the audience, I represent House District 1. And that is when they redistricted Ohio, they started in the middle point of Columbus. And so I represent the State House. I represent all of downtown Columbus, so that's the capital of our state. And if you were in my office, I would say, everything that the light touches, Simba, is mine. Anything the shadow touches within the 5-mile radius, don't go there, it's not my district. I represent the most central part of Columbus where the State House is. And yet, there are so many in my district who've never been down the street to the State House. And so I have to really be intentional about educating folks first about what I do, how I can support them, and then show in real time, here's what I mean when I say I'm gonna support you. And so there's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done with my job. And I love to do it because, again, I didn't have that growing up. I always tell people if I can boil down everything I do in the legislature, it would have been saving my mama, because she worked 2 jobs, had to navigate a lot of hardship, finally got a union job, and life got a little bit better. But that still was a struggle for my family as she navigated that transition. And so how do I make Ohio better for all families? And so to speak to the marginalized communities, I'm always intentional about understanding what their needs are, right? And then I take their needs and I bring it with me into the State House. And a lot of my bills that I craft, whether it's the Pay Stub Protection Act, whether it's addressing lead, whether it's addressing eating disorders or addressing, prostate cancer, right? These are things that communities have come to me and said, hey, we need a real focal point, a real, a member who understands these issues and is willing to impact these issues in real time for us.
And I gotta ask, because maybe I'm dating myself, but I remember the days when, Ohio was a swing state, Democrats, and you could move, especially legislation that helped working people through a state like Ohio.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that in a while now. What is the state of Ohio politics, and when you try to move the legislation that helps people like your mom, how is it received?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate, I'll tell you. When I came into this legislature in 2020, so I won my election in 2020, then took office in 21. This was during COVID. And I remember a colleague of mine saying that I was not going to pass any bills into law. And maybe it's just a chip on my shoulder, or being from Cleveland. But I was like, well, watch me. And I passed 7 into law. Some of them went through various bills, but I'm still claiming them as a win because I negotiated my bills to go into those bills. And then I passed what we call the Derogatory Language Act, which essentially changed the revised code and removed all the stigmatic words that really harm people, like habitual drunkard, the R word, crazy, insane. Those words were still in the Ohio Revised Code. And in fact, that bill made the most changes to the Ohio Revised Code in the history of the Ohio Revised Code. That was my bill that I tailored and authored. And I bring that up because a lot of the things that I do are bipartisan. And so my first term, my second term, and now even my third term, I have passed over 14, 15 bills now collectively, and majority of them were with a Republican joint sponsor or Republicans who joined me on the bills. And it's because two things. One, we really boil down politics, for me, is about relationships. And then 2, I recognize that the issues I fight for, those kitchen table issues, aren't just democratic issues. They're issues that cross boundaries, cross rural perspective, whether it's urban or suburban or rural. They cross whether you vote for Republican or Democrat. Like, these are issues that impact all of us. And so I work with Republicans to say, this is not an issue that just impacts District 1. This impacts your farmers in your district as well. And through those conversations, we've been able to do some really good work in passing legislation. Now, there are some things that I will fight tooth and nail against some of my colleagues on because they just ideologically just don't align with me or what I believe is the right thing to do for Ohio. But in the most part, I've seen a lot of bills that have been good bills by Republicans and Democrats pass into law. It's just that, unfortunately, what happens is the media gets really hyper fixated and focused on the bills that are politically divisive, and unfortunately may not shine as much of a light on those bills that actually will move Ohio forward, but maybe kind of boring, to be quite frank with you. And so that's kind of the balance here. For me, I know that there's some things that I'm against my Republican colleagues on, that I will fight them and debate them on the floor. There's a lot of things that I joined them on, and where they joined me on, and that's how we just have to navigate that dynamic because, this is what we have.
And what is the state of play for politically in Ohio? Both in terms of democracy, ensuring that it's a level playing field for both parties, and then in terms of electing statewide Democrats, eventually a presidential election.
Right, I'll tell you, that's one of the parts where it's really hard. I'm not going to lie to you. And for folks listening, we recently had on the ballot issue 1, which would have removed the legislators from the process of drawing the maps, both at the congressional level and at the state legislative level. Because what we have in Ohio is, and maybe folks listening know this, gerrymandering is real in the state of Ohio. We have 34 members in the Democratic side, which again is a super minority. And in reality, Ohio is about a 45-65 split, right? And on some swing years, a 50-50 or 51-49. And we've seen that play out in different election cycles, whether it's 08 election cycle, where we actually took back the House, or even before that during the Vern Rife days, where the Democrats were in power in the House of Representatives for a long period of time. And so what I will tell you is that the rules of engagement changed. The failure or the not passing issue 1 really, I believe, created a uncharted territory for us as Democrats, because now you have Republicans who have control of the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. You have Republicans control all statewide offices. You have Republicans that control both the House and the Senate chambers. And what it spells out is an environment that may not be right for democratic values, like expanding voter access, right? Like protecting LGBTQA issues, like addressing, looking at public education and investing in it in a way that is equitable to what we're doing with voucher systems, right? And so there are realities at play because of the just a breakdown of power that it unfortunately means that some of these values don't ever make it to the governor's desk. And that's a problem for me, it's a problem for my colleagues, and ultimately I think it's a problem for the state.
Yeah. So tell me, because there may be folks listening also, red states, maybe blue cities and red states.
Yeah.
And they're like, why would I bother, right? Why would I go to the state capitol, be in a super minority? Maybe I can vote no, maybe there's a few things to find, but you're a talented guy, you can do any number of things. What keeps you in the fight?
What keeps me in the fight is, I have people in Ohio that I love who rely on me. And that's just not just my family, that's my friends. Those are people, community leaders, community residents who tell me every day that even though it is a bleak environment, that they're inspired by the fact that I show up and I show out and and I'm an effective legislator. I also love people. I think about one of my favorite quotes is by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of my dear Alpha brothers. He says, "To serve, you only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love." And if I love people enough, I have to fight for them. I have to see their humanity. I have to be responsive to that humanity and ultimately put forth a bold vision for that one that's rooted in love, right? And I always tell people, if you love someone, it's not just loving them, it's about how do we create legislation that showcases in real time that we love them, right? And so I think about the work I do like a love letter to Ohio, right? It's about really thinking strategically about how I see this place, this state, and where we can go with the right people. And then hopefully through that love letter, right, we get a lot of other folks who say, I love this state too. I want to show up and run for office. I want to think about how I get involved at the school board level, at the city council level, at the county level, state level, and even the federal level, right? So that love is not just with one body, it's with all of us kind of trying to do our best to move the state forward. If I can do that in my little small circle of influence, and everyone decides to do that, as well, man, the state of Ohio will look completely different in a matter of seconds, in my belief.
How does that message of love resonate and expand in a world where algorithms optimize for controversy, fear, rage, all those things?
It's interesting. I just had a town hall, and I think people are tired. They're tired of the divisiveness. They're tired of feeling like there's no hope, right? But in their world, they are the hope, right? In their world, they're working hard for their families. They're trying their best, and they just want to be seen by their government. And and me saying that out loud, like, hey, I love you. Like, I'm fighting for you every single day. It's energetic. I think it's now I can't speak to social media. Unfortunately, social media is not people. Let me say that. It is very much a system, and it is curated to maximize a particular viewership. And unfortunately, what we know is controversy breeds viewership, and so I can't change that. That is the system that needs to be changed. But what I try to do is change hearts and minds who meet me, who see me for the very first time, who have never been to the State House, and they say, wow, I didn't even recognize that what you do impacts my lived experience in the state. And so I just try to, show up as my best self for my constituents. And hopefully those encounters plant the seeds or ripples, if you will, of hope to say, wow, how do I get involved? Because there needs to be more yous out there. And so that's really how I navigate the world. I don't have a lot of time in this space. I only get 8 years, I'm term limited. And so I have about 3 more years left. If you don't include this year, this year's almost done. And so within that 3 years, I have to do some incredible things for my constituents. And then hopefully when I move on, so the person who comes after me is going to continue the work, right? And so that's how I look at this space. I can't change artificial systems. They're created to be how they're created. What I can change is people, and to make them feel connected to government in a way that they've never been before.
You seem incredibly thoughtful and intentional. How do you think about how you allocate your time, both on a session-to-session basis, but also over the next decade? How are you going to apply your talent?
That's a great question. That's an over question, like introspectively, for me, I'm very spiritual. God is at the center of my life, and I feel like everything happens for a reason, and nothing is by happenstance. And so my hope is, with the time I have left in the legislature, try to pass as many bills as I can. My intention, hopefully, one day is to lead our caucus. I'm an assistant leader now, which makes me the highest ranking Black person in Ohio House. And I've had that role now for the last 4 years, to be the highest ranking Black person in Ohio House. And so hopefully one day I'll lead this caucus and, again, plant seeds of evolution and continuation of excellence within the caucus. And then, see where the future takes me. There's a lot of opportunity. The one thing I'll say, and I know we didn't talk about this, there is and I've talked about this with a lot of electeds now, most recently, there's a sacrifice that comes with doing this job. I'm 37. I don't have a wife. I don't have any kids yet. I've done this since the age of 22. So I've been in the game, on the grind, since I was a little boy, essentially a young man, trying to understand how to not just understand the system, not just try to get into the system, but ultimately work it from within for the betterment of people. And that takes a lot of time, especially if you're not picked, if you're not, somebody didn't just elevate you and put you there, right? You had to work at it and to ultimately get in the door, and then by what you do when you're in the door, so that was my story. And so another part of me is also thinking about, how do I make sure that I build my family, right? I'm going to have kids at a later age than when my mama had me, right? And so that's also at my front of my mind as well. And so doing that and also balancing the needs of my people in the community is something that I'm still figuring out, right? And so I'm taking these 3 years to do the best I can. Hopefully by those 3 years I'll have a wife and hopefully have a child, maybe, Lord willing. But once I'm done with the legislature, there's a lot of opportunities for me. And I want to just be positioned to do the best that I can with the time I have left. I learned very early in my life that I am one chain in the link of excellence, that everything will not change based upon my existence, right? I think about that through Martin Luther King or Malcolm X and other people. They have been here, and the issues that they were fighting for are still here. it is likely that the issues that I'm fighting for, they may get a little better because I existed in this space, but they won't be gone.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that my time here is one link, and it's about what I am doing to be the strongest link for someone else to latch onto. And that's essentially how I look at my time and my service. It's like, what am I doing to build the next generation, and what am I doing to make sure that the things that people link on for me are strong to survive and to hold the continuation of the excellence.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. I gotta say, you and I had a conversation at the last New Deal Leaders just over breakfast. And I've kept it in mind, and I've wanted you on the podcast.
Yeah.
So happy to have you in the New Deal.
Thank
so
you.
happy to have you on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Ryan.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,